You might look at the Philippines and see a nation of vibrant culture, beautiful islands, and a developing economy. You might think of it as a country that has faced significant economic challenges over the decades. And you would be right. But there is another story, a story told not in headlines, but in the quiet, steady numbers of a central bank balance sheet. The Philippines today holds one of the largest stockpiles of foreign currency reserves in Southeast Asia. We are talking about a financial fortress worth over 100 billion United States dollars. This is a massive economic shield, enough money to cover all the goods the country imports for many months, and enough to pay off its short-term foreign debts multiple times over. This fact often comes as a surprise. How did a nation once famously called the sick man of Asia, a country that nearly went bankrupt just a few decades ago, build such an immense financial defense? To understand this incredible economic turnaround, you need to go back. You need to go back to a time of deep crisis, when the national treasury was empty and the future looked bleak. The story of the reserves of the Philippines is a story of collapse, resilience, and the quiet, relentless work of millions of its people. In 1965, a man named Ferdinand Marcos became the president of the Philippines. For more than 20 years, he would lead the country. During his early years, he initiated a massive infrastructure program. The government built roads, bridges, and impressive public buildings, all funded by borrowing huge sums of money from foreign banks and international institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. This was a strategy of debt-driven development. On the surface, it looked like progress. But beneath the surface, a deep economic sickness was taking hold. A significant portion of the borrowed money did not go to the intended projects. It was lost to systemic corruption. The national debt of the Philippines began to swell at an alarming rate. When Marcos first took office, the external debt of the country was less than $1 billion. By the time he was forced from power in 1986, that number had exploded to over $28 billion. The country was drowning in obligations it could not possibly meet. The breaking point came in 1983. The opposition leader, Benigno Aquino Jr., was assassinated upon his return from exile. This single event triggered a massive political and economic crisis. International confidence in the Marcos regime evaporated overnight. Foreign banks stopped lending money. Investors pulled their capital out of the country in a panic. This is known as capital flight. The Philippines was running out of foreign currency, primarily United States dollars, which it needed to pay for essential imports like oil and raw materials. The economy went into a freefall. For the first time in its history, the country defaulted on its foreign debt. It was a moment of national humiliation and economic desperation. In 1986, a peaceful uprising known as the People Power Revolution removed Ferdinand Marcos from power. A new government, led by Corazon Aquino, the widow of the assassinated opposition leader, took over. The task ahead of them was monumental. They inherited a nation that was not only politically fractured but also economically bankrupt. The government of Aquino had to negotiate with hundreds of international creditor banks to restructure the massive debt. These were painful years of austerity and slow, difficult reforms. The focus was not on growth, but on survival. The real shift in policy began under the next president, Fidel V. Ramos, who came to power in 1992. The administration of Ramos believed that the old, protected economic model had failed. The solution, they argued, was to open the Philippines to the world. A program called Philippines 2000 was launched. This program dismantled long-standing monopolies in key industries. The telecommunications sector, once dominated by a single company, was opened to competition. This led to a boom in telephone lines and, later, the mobile phone industry. The banking sector was also liberalized, allowing more foreign banks to enter the market and increase competition and efficiency. These reforms were critical. They were laying a new foundation for the economy. They were preparing the country for a new era of global integration. But this new foundation would be tested almost immediately, and the test would come from its neighbors. In July of 1997, a crisis began in Thailand. The Thai baht, the currency of Thailand, collapsed. This triggered a financial contagion that spread like wildfire across East and Southeast Asia. The economies of Indonesia, South Korea, and Malaysia were devastated. Currencies plunged, companies went bankrupt, and millions of people lost their jobs. This was the Asian financial crisis. The Philippines was not immune. The Philippine peso also came under intense pressure, and the economy suffered. But something different happened this time. Unlike its neighbors, the economy of the Philippines did not completely collapse. It bent, but it did not break. The banking reforms enacted under President Ramos proved to be crucial. The banking system of the Philippines was stronger and better regulated than those in neighboring countries, so it could withstand the shock. The 1997 crisis was a brutal but essential lesson for the economic managers of the Philippines. It seared into their minds the extreme danger of not having a substantial buffer of foreign reserves. They saw firsthand how quickly global capital could flee and how vulnerable a country was without a strong financial defense. This event would fundamentally shape the policy of the Central Bank of the Philippines for decades to come. The mission was clear: never again would the country be so vulnerable. They needed to build a fortress, and the building blocks would come from two powerful, emerging sources. The first source was not a corporation or a government policy, but people. Starting in the 1970s, driven by a lack of opportunities at home, large numbers of Filipinos began to seek work abroad. They worked as engineers and construction workers in the Middle East, as nurses and doctors in the United States and Europe, as sailors on cargo ships crisscrossing the globe, and as domestic helpers in Hong Kong and Singapore. They became known as Overseas Filipino Workers, or OFWs. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, this trickle of workers became a steady flow. By the 2000s, it had become a torrent. Each one of these millions of workers sent a portion of their earnings back home to their families. These payments, known as remittances, were sent in foreign currencies like United States dollars, Saudi riyals, and euros. Year after year, the total amount of these remittances grew. In the year 2000, they amounted to about $6 billion. By 2010, that figure had more than tripled to nearly $20 billion. In 2023, personal remittances from overseas Filipinos reached a record high of $37.2 billion. This became the first great pillar supporting the accumulation of reserves. Unlike foreign investment, which can be volatile and flee during a crisis, remittances are remarkably stable. They are driven by family ties, not by profit motives. Even during the 2008 global financial crisis, when economies around the world contracted, the remittances sent by OFWs to the Philippines continued to grow. This provided the country with a reliable, consistent, and massive inflow of foreign currency year after year. At the same time the flow of remittances was growing, a second, equally powerful pillar was being constructed. In the early 2000s, companies in North America and Europe were looking for ways to become more efficient and cut costs. They began to outsource some of their business operations to other countries. This was the birth of the business process outsourcing, or BPO, industry. And the Philippines was perfectly positioned to capture a huge share of this new global market. There were several key advantages. The Philippines has a large, young, and educated population. Crucially, a high proficiency in English is widespread, a legacy of the American colonial period. There was also a strong cultural affinity with the West, which made communication in customer service roles much easier. It started with call centers, where Filipino agents would handle customer inquiries for American companies. But the industry quickly evolved. It expanded into higher-value services. This included medical and legal transcription, software development, animation, game design, and complex financial and accounting services. The growth was explosive. In the early 2000s, the industry employed only a few thousand people. Today, the BPO sector in the Philippines provides jobs for over 1.7 million Filipinos. The revenue it generates is immense. Just like remittances, these revenues are earned in foreign currency. In 2023, the industry was projected to earn over $35 billion. Together, The twin engines of OFW remittances and BPO revenues were pumping a river of more than $70 billion into the Philippine economy every single year. This is where the central bank enters the story. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or BSP, is the central bank of the country. After the devastations of the Marcos-era debt crisis and the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the purpose and mandate of the BSP became incredibly focused. Its primary mission, enshrined in a new charter from 1993, was to maintain price stability. A key part of that mission was managing the country's foreign exchange system. Here is how the system works. The billions of dollars from OFWs and BPO companies flow into the local banking system. To use that money in the Philippines, it must be converted into Philippine pesos. This creates a huge demand for pesos and a huge supply of dollars in the market. If left alone, the basic law of supply and demand would cause the value of the Philippine peso to rise dramatically against the dollar. While a strong peso might sound good, it can be very damaging to the economy. It would make the exports of the Philippines more expensive and less competitive on the world market. It would also mean that the dollar remittances from OFWs would translate into fewer pesos for their families back home. To prevent this, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas intervenes. It enters the foreign exchange market and buys up the excess dollars. This action has two profound effects. First, it eases the upward pressure on the peso, keeping the currency at a stable and competitive level. Second, every dollar the BSP buys is added to its official account. This account is known as the Gross International Reserves, or GIA. This is the mechanism, the steady, daily process of absorbing the massive inflows from remittances and outsourcing is how the fortress of reserves was built, dollar by dollar, day by day. For years, the government of the Philippines and the central bank worked on this strategy. They managed the national budget carefully to keep deficits low. They continued to reform the economy. And all the while, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas was steadily accumulating reserves. The world began to take notice. In 2013, a major milestone was achieved. Fitch Ratings, one of the three major global credit rating agencies, upgraded the credit rating of the Philippines to investment grade. This was the first time in history the country had received such a rating. The other major agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's, soon followed. Getting an investment grade rating is like receiving a seal of approval for an entire economy. It is a signal to global investors that the country is a safe and stable place to put their money. It acknowledges the strong economic fundamentals, the manageable level of public debt, and, critically, the very large and adequate level of foreign reserves. This achievement created a virtuous cycle. The investment grade rating attracted even more foreign direct investment, which in turn further strengthened the economy and the currency, allowing the central bank to build its reserves even higher. The true value of this enormous reserve stockpile has been demonstrated in recent history. In 2008, a financial crisis that started in the United States housing market engulfed the entire globe. Major banks collapsed and international trade seized up. Many developing countries were hit hard. The Philippines, however, weathered the storm remarkably well. Its strong reserve position meant it did not need to panic. The currency remained stable, and the economy continued to grow. A more severe test came with the global pandemic in 2020. Economies all over the world shut down. The government of the Philippines, like others, had to spend enormous sums of money on healthcare and financial aid for its citizens. During such a crisis, a country without reserves would have to desperately seek emergency loans from abroad on unfavorable terms. But the Philippines had its shield. The $100 billion reserve fortress meant the government could finance its pandemic response without triggering a currency crisis. It could confidently pay for imported vaccines, medical equipment, and other essential goods. The reserves provided stability in a time of unprecedented uncertainty. It was the complete opposite of the crisis in 1983, when a political shock left the country helpless and bankrupt. This time, faced with a global health and economic shock, the country was prepared. So when we ask why the Philippines has so much foreign currency, the answer is not a simple one. It is a story that begins in the ashes of a debt crisis. It is a story built on painful but necessary reforms that opened the country to the world. It is a story powered by the sacrifices of millions of overseas Filipino workers and the skills of a new generation in the BPO industry. And it is a story of deliberate and prudent policy from a central bank that learned the hard lessons of the past. This stockpile of over $100 billion is more than just a number on a spreadsheet. It is a symbol of economic resilience. It is a buffer against global shocks. It represents a form of economic sovereignty that was unimaginable just a generation ago. It is a financial fortress, built over decades, that now stands guard over the future of the Philippine economy.